I knew they were planning to erase me the moment I saw the envelope. Cream-colored, heavy paper, elegant gold lettering, the kind you'd expect for a governor's daughter or a royal event. And yet, the way my fingers trembled when I opened it, that was instinct. That was 73 years of knowing when betrayal is coming. Madison Grace Ellis, my granddaughter, my baby before she was anyone else. I raised her while her parents were busy finding themselves, which really meant cheating, screaming, and blaming everyone but themselves. I brushed that little girl's hair, wiped her tears, and promised her monsters weren't real, knowing full well her mother and father were proving me a liar every night. And years ago, she'd whispered it to me, right after her sweet 16 party, curled in my lap. "When I get married, Grandma, you'll be right beside me. You're my real mother anyway." That's why the envelope cut deeper than a knife. Inside was an invitation, not a phone call, not a visit, just paper. And there it was, buried in the fine print. "Please be seated in the second family row." Second row. Not at the table of honor, not as a reader, not as a part of anything meaningful. They wanted me quiet, decorative, background noise. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Thomas, my son, her father, texted me when I asked about it. "Busy, don't start drama, Mom." Oh, honey. They raised a girl who crocheted silence into every corner of her soul. But they forgot I was a woman forged in fire. I buried a husband, survived a cheating son, built a life from scraps while they dined on silver spoons I polished with my hands. And now, they wanted me hidden behind sequins and photographers, smiling like a polite old widow. They thought this wedding would be about them. They were wrong. It would be my stage, my spotlight, and my last toast would be the one they'd never forget. 3 weeks before the wedding, I started my little project. I may not be tech-savvy, but I've got a black spiral notebook full of passwords. Mine, theirs, some they didn't think I still had. I also have a memory like a vault. You don't spend decades as the family doormat without collecting a few souvenirs. It started with the guest list. I wasn't supposed to see it, but Madison's childhood friend, sweet Olivia, now working at the hotel hosting the wedding, still calls me Grammy J. She texted me one night, clearly upset. "You're not even on the VIP list, Grandma. You're below second cousins. What's going on?" I smiled at my phone and wrote 3 words back. "I'm getting ready." You see, I've lived long enough to know this. People love to keep their skeletons in closets. But they forget who hung the bones there in the first place. I knew my son Thomas's deepest shame, and it wasn't just that he borrowed $80,000 from me after his 3rd divorce and never paid it back. No, it was what he did with that money. I had the receipts. I knew my daughter-in-law Denise had a little habit she didn't want the church ladies to know about. Powdered, expensive, slipped into her purse between Pilates and prayer group. I had photos. I never wanted to use them. And I knew that my dear Madison, the very bride I raised, had been coached to ice me out. I overheard it. She left her phone on the kitchen counter on speaker last Thanksgiving, not realizing I was in the laundry room folding linens. "Look," Denise whispered to her. "Your grandma's had her time. This is your moment. You don't need guilt. Just seat her quietly and move on." That hurt. It wasn't a knife, it was worse. It was dismissal, erasure. But I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I began planning. The dress I chose was midnight blue velvet. Elegant. Regal. The kind of gown that says, "You should have seated me up front." I had my hair styled by the same woman who used to do the town mayor's wife. I looked like the matriarch I was, no, AM. I also brought a USB drive in my purse. Labeled, "Toasts." It had everything. Emails, bank records, voice memos, photos, a video of Thomas screaming at me during a birthday party caught on the baby monitor, even a little letter from Madison herself, written in crayon when she was 9, saying, "Grandma, I wish you were my mom." I wasn't going to use it all. Just enough. Just enough to remind them who raised this family, who held it together with duct tape and casseroles, and who they underestimated. The wedding was now 1 week away. I had my dress. I had my plan. And I had nothing left to lose. The wedding was held at the Briar Rose estate, one of those places that smells like old money, fake smiles, and overpriced champagne. Chandeliers the size of small cars, rose petals scattered like someone was paid by the petal, and servers who looked too scared to blink. When I arrived, no one greeted me. Not Madison, not Thomas, not even the event planner, just a clipboard girl with too much blush and not enough authority. A high name. I gave her a smile I've used for decades, sweet, warm, and sharp enough to slice cheese. Mrs. Joanne Ellis, grandmother of the bride, matriarch of the family. Her eyes darted down the list. She found me, I saw it, but she hesitated anyway. That moment, it told me everything. She'd been told something about me, warned maybe, and she believed it. Good, let them fear me a little. Oh yes, you're in Section B, second family row. There it was again. Section B like a damn parking lot. I nodded and walked inside, head held high, velvet gown trailing behind me like a queen entering enemy territory. The rehearsal dinner was that night. The air was thick with pretense. Madison looked stunning, I won't lie, a vision in white satin. But she didn't meet my eyes, not once. She hugged distant cousins, laughed with Denise's book club friends, but when I approached, she looked right through me. Hi, sweetheart, I said gently. You look radiant. Thanks, Grandma, she said, short, polite, practiced. That grandma sounded like a courtesy, not affection. Like I was the neighbor's old dog she didn't want to pet. Across the room, Thomas avoided me like I was radioactive. Denise whispered to him constantly, her eyes flicking to me every few seconds, like I might detonate if left unsupervised. They weren't wrong. After dinner, the toasts began. Light-hearted ones from bridesmaids and golf buddies, anecdotes, flattery, nervous jokes, laughter, tears, and then the event planner leaned in to whisper to Madison. Madison turned pale. I watched her nod, barely, and glanced toward me with a flash of panic. Because the planner had just said, your grandmother submitted her name to give a toast. And I had. No one objected. No one dared, not in front of all those people, all those phones recording. The planner tapped her glass and smiled. We have one more very special toast tonight, from someone who's known the bride longer than almost anyone. Please welcome the bride's grandmother, Mrs. Joanne Ellis. There was a smattering of applause. A few surprised claps. A few heads turned sharply, as if realizing this wasn't part of the script. And I stood. I didn't rush. I didn't tremble. I walked toward that microphone like I was walking into a courtroom. I'd waited my whole life to testify in. I cleared my throat, smiled gently at Madison, then said, thank you all for being here. Before tomorrow's vows, I thought it might be time to speak a few truths of my own. Half the room tensed, and I hadn't even begun. I looked out at a sea of forced smiles and real tension. Champagne flutes hung midair. Forks froze inches from lips. Thomas was already sweating, and Denise clutched her clutch like it might save her from drowning. Madison, she looked like a child again, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, frozen in the fear of not knowing what came next. I held the microphone like it was my final wand, my parting weapon. Madison, I began softly, I remember the night you were born. It was raining. Your father had forgotten the hospital bag, and your mother was crying not from pain, but because she thought having a baby would fix her marriage. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Nervous chuckles, a few gasps, I smiled just barely. But you, my darling, were perfect. And when they handed you to me, because they were too tired, too distracted, I looked into your little eyes and promised I'd protect you from everything they weren't strong enough to fight. I turned to the room now, voice steady, but rising. I kept that promise for 27 years, through the screaming matches, the custody threats, the silent treatments, the debt, and the lies. I was the one who picked up the pieces, smiled for the neighbors, and baked birthday cakes when no one else remembered. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because that's what grandmothers do. I paused, let the weight settle. But somewhere along the way, this family decided I became inconvenient. I turned to Thomas. He flinched. My own son, who borrowed tens of thousands of dollars from me, without ever repaying it, now screens my calls. People murmured. Thomas opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. No, Thomas, you've had your turn. I pulled out a small printed paper from my clutch, held it up. Denise, I hope your prayer group doesn't check your pharmacy receipts. I have them here, color-coded by dosage and date. Denise gasped, clutched Thomas's arm. Faces began turning. I turned back to Madison, softening. And you, sweetheart, I don't blame you, not fully. I know they coached you, guilted you, manipulated you into thinking I was a burden, but you forgot something. Now my voice cracked, not from age, but from everything I had swallowed over decades. I was the one who loved you when no one else had the time. I was the one who raised you while they found themselves in other people's beds, and I never asked for anything in return, not until now. I pulled a small remote from my purse, clicked it. Behind me, the screen, originally meant for a wedding slideshow, flickered on. First, a photo, little Madison in my arms, covered in birthday cake. Then, a screenshot of the old email from Thomas, begging for money. Then, a text from Denise, telling Madison to keep the old bat in the second row. And then the audio. Static, then my own voice, recorded from that Thanksgiving day in the laundry room. Just seat her quietly and move on. The room went silent. You could hear the collective gasp, the discomfort, the rage bubbling behind fake smiles, and me, I stood there, finally weightless. This isn't revenge, I said. This is the truth, and if it burns this family down to ash, maybe it's time we rebuild. Then I stepped away from the mic. And the applause. It started slow, one clap then another. From strangers, from a cousin I hadn't seen in years. Even Olivia, Madison's old friend, stood and clapped through tears. But my family, they sat frozen. Exactly as they had left me, all these years. The next morning, I woke up in a king's suite I hadn't paid for. Olivia had slipped me a key after the dinner. She said nothing, just hugged me tight, pressed the card into my palm, and whispered, "You were the only real one in that room." I slept like a woman who had finally returned someone else's burdens. No more secrets, no more silence, and no more pretending that family was something sacred just because it was blood. I stepped into the hotel lobby in my soft gray sweater, hair brushed back, no makeup, and people stared. Not in disgust, in awe, in disbelief, in respect. A woman from the groom's side approached me by the coffee station. Mid-40s, tight bun, shaking hands. "Ma'am," she said, "I just wanted to say that was the bravest damn thing I've ever seen. You spoke for more women than you'll ever know." I smiled, took my coffee, thanked her quietly. But inside, I was boiling with emotion. Not from shame. From clarity. Because guess who finally had time for me that morning? Thomas. He cornered me in the courtyard, like a child sent to apologize, after breaking a neighbor's window. "Mom," he said, breathing hard, "what the hell was that?" I sipped my coffee, let him stand there in his wrinkled polo and his panic. "That," I said, "was a warning I gave you 20 years too late. You embarrassed us." "You shamed yourself," I replied. "I just held up the mirror." He scoffed, tried to recover. "You know how hard we've worked to keep this family together." I raised an eyebrow. "You took my money, my time, my trust. You let your wife call me a burden. You let your daughter treat me like a maid with memory loss. Don't stand here and sell me unity. You couldn't spell loyalty with a flashlight and a dictionary." That's when he dropped the act. "You know what? Fine, you're out, done. Don't come tomorrow. Don't come near Madison. You're lucky we don't throw you out of this hotel." I stepped forward, not threatening, just close enough so he couldn't ignore what I said next. "You're not throwing me out, because I own part of this hotel." His face cracked, just a flicker. And then I told him what no one knew. That 15 years ago, when he was too busy gambling and Denise was finding herself in someone else's marriage, I invested in Olivia's family hotel business. Quietly, strategically, I helped them buy the Briar Rose. I watched it grow. And when they offered me a corner share and a board vote, I said yes. So unless you want to be the first groom's father escorted off the premises by security, I said gently, I suggest you go fix your tie and practice your apology. He stormed off. And me. I took a second cup of coffee, sat by the window, watched the rain begin to fall soft, steady, clean. The wedding was still happening. But the story, it already belonged to me. Weddings are supposed to feel like the start of something new. But this one, it felt like the closing chapter of a family novel, long overdue for its final sentence. I arrived at the venue 15 minutes before the ceremony, dressed in pale silver this time, not a trace of black or navy, not mourning, not grieving. Just glowing. People turned as I walked down the aisle, not out of politeness, but reverence. That kind of stunned silence reserved for someone who told the truth when it was inconvenient and costly. The second row placard was still there. I walked right past it. Sat in the first row. No one stopped me. Thomas and Denise, not even present. Word was, Denise locked herself in the bridal suite crying all morning, and Thomas had stormed off to cool down. The groom's family was whispering about some scandal, and more than one person had mentioned the phrase, she exposed everything at the rehearsal dinner. Let them whisper, let them speculate. I wasn't here for them. I was here for Madison. She walked down the aisle with her uncle, my brother, Henry, who flew in last minute and hadn't said more than 5 words to Thomas in a decade. She didn't smile, didn't beam, but her eyes found mine. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she really looked at me. Not through me, not around me. At me. The ceremony itself was beautiful, tasteful, quick, but when it came time for the does anyone object part, the room tensed like a held breath. No one stood. But I saw the priest glance my way, just for a beat too long, like he'd heard stories already. After the vows, after the kiss, after the polite applause and camera flashes, Madison walked toward me. I stood to meet her. She hugged me. Tight. Whispered through tears, I'm so sorry. And I, despite everything, held her like I had when she was 5 years old and crying over her mother's broken promises. You still have time, I whispered back. To be better than them, start today. She nodded. And then, in the strangest twist of all, she turned to the photographer and said, Take a photo, just me and Grandma. No parents, no maid of honor, no groom. Just her and me, in the front row of the wreckage they created. That picture, I'd frame it later. Put it right beside the one of her as a little girl, covered in frosting, sitting on my lap. Because that's what this moment was. A reckoning. A beginning. A reminder that sometimes healing starts not with forgiveness, but with truth. The reception was held in the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, a 7-piece string ensemble, white hydrangeas dripping from every surface like the decorator was allergic to restraint. But the air, thick, unsettled, like everyone was pretending they didn't just survive a public shamming the night before. Guests whispered in clusters. Every few feet, I'd catch fragments. Did you hear what she said about the daughter-in-law? I heard she brought receipts. She's a legend, honestly. Reminds me of my grandmother. They weren't talking about the bride. They were talking about me. I walked into that ballroom like I owned it, because I almost did, and I took my seat at the head table where no place card waited for me. I didn't care. I moved one. Sat beside the groom's mother, who gave me a tight, grateful smile. She leaned over. I never liked Denise, she whispered. You did what we were all too scared to. I almost laughed. And then the DJ tapped the mic. The clinking of forks on glasses began. The music faded. It was time for the official toasts. A bridesmaid sobbed through hers, something about college dorms and forever friendships. The best man made a joke about Madison's online shopping habits. Polite laughter, flat energy. Everyone was still thinking about my toast from the night before. Then Madison stood. Unplanned. No microphone, no paper. Just her. I wasn't going to speak tonight, she began, her voice shaking slightly. But after what happened yesterday, I think I need to. A hush fell over the room. She turned to face the guests, all of them. My grandmother raised me. That's not exaggeration. That's not poetic. That's fact. She taught me how to braid my hair, how to cook eggs without breaking the yolk, and how to stand up for myself. And yesterday, she reminded me that silence can sometimes hurt more than words ever will. The groom reached for her hand. She didn't take it. I let people push her aside, people who told me she was difficult, that she was too much, that honoring her would be drama. But the real drama was pretending she didn't matter. You could hear sniffles now. Not pity. Recognition. So tonight, I want to raise a glass, not just to love or marriage or the future, but to women who keep families alive when no one else will, who clean up messes, hold secrets, and stay standing even when everyone else tries to sit them down. She turned to me. To Grandma Jo, the woman who taught me truth is love. And the room stood. They stood. Every single one of them. Some reluctantly, some proudly, but they rose, glasses high, and toasted me. And in that moment, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel cast aside. I felt seen. And not just for the fire I lit, but for the ashes I kept holding until it was safe to let them fall. 3 days after the wedding, I sat at my lawyer's office sipping tea out of a porcelain cup I bought him 5 years ago. For the woman who always has a plan, he'd etched on the inside in gold lettering. Well, the plan was about to unfold. You see, I had rewritten my will 18 months ago. After Thomas's last tantrum, after Denise forgot my birthday, after Madison missed 3 family dinners in a row and sent me a 5-word text. Can't make it. Sorry, Grandma. Back then, my lawyer asked gently, Are you sure about this, Mrs. Ellis? Disinheriting your son entirely is a bold move. I had nodded. I brought them into this world. That was my gift. I don't owe them more for making me invisible. I'd split everything 3 ways. 1/3 to Olivia and her hotel fund, because she'd stood by me, offered shelter, and never once treated me like a problem to be solved. 1/3 to the Children's Reading Center I used to volunteer at, because those kids listened to my stories when my own blood wouldn't. And the final third, to Madison, but not unconditionally. I'd left it in a trust, accessible only after she turned 30 and wrote a letter, to be submitted through my lawyer, explaining the one thing she learned from me that changed her life. At the time, it felt harsh. Now, it felt prophetic. Because the wedding had shifted something. Not just in her, in me. The woman I saw give that toast at the reception wasn't a puppet anymore. She was someone becoming her own kind of dangerous. Someone who might break cycles instead of repeating them. My lawyer looked at me over his glasses. You still good with this structure? I smiled, nodded slowly. Only one change, I said. Bump the reading center to 40%. Take 10 from my son's emergency clause. You mean the clause where he only gets anything if he's on hospice? Exactly. We both chuckled. It was cruel, maybe. But then again, was it? Thomas had spent decades cashing emotional checks I didn't have the balance to cover. He took without guilt, insulted without apology, and expected inheritance like it was his birthright. Well, now it was his absence. That night back at home, I found a letter on my porch. No stamp, just tucked under my doormat. Handwritten, slanted, familiar. It was from Madison. Dear Grandma, it began. If I had to pick one lesson you taught me, it's this. Love without boundaries turns into sacrifice. And a woman who gives everything will be left with nothing. I saw you, I finally saw you, and I will never unsee it. I didn't cry, but I sat very still. Because sometimes vindication doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And when it does, you don't need applause. You just need peace. A week after the wedding, the doorbell rang just past 7 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I just poured myself a glass of red, turned on the old record player, and settled into my recliner when I heard it, a sharp, urgent ring. Not the kind that says neighbor dropping off cookies. The kind that says, we need to talk. I opened the door and froze. It was Laurie, my estranged daughter, Thomas's older sister. The one who left 15 years ago after an ugly family fight about money, betrayal, and some truths none of us were ready to face. She hadn't spoken to any of us since. Not a call, not a card, not even a comment on Facebook. And yet here she was, hair streaked with gray now, eyes tired, holding a small suitcase in one hand and a bakery box in the other. "Hi, Mom," she said. My throat tightened. "Laurie, can I come in?" I nodded slowly, stepped aside. She walked in like no time had passed, but everything had. We sat across from each other. I poured her tea without asking if she still took cream. I just remembered. "I saw the video," she said finally. I looked up. "The toast," she clarified. "Someone posted it. It's going viral. The grandma exposes her greedy family at wedding clip. You're internet famous." I blinked. "You're joking." Not even a little. We both laughed, and for the first time in years, it wasn't bitter. She pulled out the bakery box, opened it. Lemon bars, my recipe. The one I hadn't written down, only whispered over the stove. "I figured," she said, "if you could be brave enough to finally say what no one else would, then I could be brave enough to come home." I didn't know what to say. We had history, not all of it pretty. She made mistakes too. But the thing about daughters is you never really stop holding out hope. "I'm not here for the money," she added quickly. "I know you probably cut us all out." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't know that." "I don't deserve it." That made me pause. Because unlike Thomas, who expected a check for every inconvenience, Laurie had come back with nothing in her hand but apology and dessert. I leaned forward. "Laurie, if I died tomorrow, you'd get nothing from my will." She nodded, took it. "But," I continued, "if you stay, if you mean it, there's still something left. Not money, not land, just the pieces of what we had. You want to rebuild them." She teared up. "I do." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first brick in a new foundation. One that didn't rely on fake smiles or obligation. One that came with truth, lemon bars, and eye contact. And that night, when we sat watching old home videos on my dusty VCR, I realized this story wasn't ending. It was evolving. Because sometimes, the child who left is the only one brave enough to come back right. 3 months passed. Autumn settled in. The trees turned fire-colored outside my window. My house smelled like cinnamon and soap. Peace had crept in quietly without grand declarations or big changes. It just arrived and stayed. Laurie did too. Not in the house, she got a place nearby. Started working with Olivia at the hotel. Turns out she's got a knack for event planning. Who knew? She's still rebuilding. I am too, in different ways. And Madison. She visited every Sunday. Not out of guilt, not duty. Out of choice. She brought flowers, stories from her new life. No mention of Thomas, none of Denise, just her, learning how to love me again without the filter of someone else's fear. One chilly morning, my lawyer called. The estate revisions were finalized. I hung up the phone, looked out at the garden I'd tended alone for so long, and smiled. My legacy, the real one, was finally in place. I hadn't just changed my will. I'd changed the narrative. No longer the forgotten matriarch. No longer the doting doormat. I'd stepped into my truth, and in doing so, I'd forced everyone else to do the same or walk away. And here's the thing, a lot of them did walk away. And I let them. Because the older you get, the more you realize, peace is often quieter than love, less sparkly, but infinitely more valuable. One day, while going through an old cedar chest, I found something I hadn't seen in years, a drawing Madison had made as a child. It was me, wearing a crown, standing between two crayon houses labeled safe and family. She had drawn herself holding my hand. On the back, in shaky, childish scrawl, it read, "Grandma is the boss of everything good." And maybe, just maybe, she was right. Because in the end, I didn't need revenge. I needed respect. I didn't need to tear the family apart. They'd already done that themselves. All I did was pull back the curtain, light a match, and walk out with the truth in my hand and my head held high. My last toast wasn't bitter. It was necessary. And it echoed long after the music stopped.